Oh shit, guys. I've only got 1 minute left. Caralho! Come to Brazil! Oui, l'escargot, le baguette. This Pickems sponsored by Tom Cruise. I save. I felt like we just had a bird's eye view over this whole tournament. You know what I'm saying? Like, it was just too easy. Whew. That was a close one. All right, boys. The king has returned for playoffs. Crown is a little scuffed. I didn't exactly make it out. If you refer back to my Legend Stage predictions, we got 4 of them. And 4 is less than 5. I'm going to do a little something different this time around when predicting my picks for the playoffs stage. I am predicting Counter-Strike doesn't explode violently after the major. I'm also predicting it doesn't whimper out. I'm predicting Counter-Strike is saved by the PGL Major Stockholm 2021 playoffs in an arena with some of the best talent this game has ever seen. What we need in this Pickems video is to predict the most hype matchups, and I am going to try and convince you why a matchup like that would even happen. Let's work our way up from the bottom to the top and go through every individual matchup as I try to craft, WWE style, what will be the most hype major playoffs of all time. Even though Sadicus isn't there to add the fucking in. The best of all fucking time! Our first matchup is going to be Heroic against Pr0no. Logic dictates that Pr0no seem to be a little bit more confident and a little bit less shaky, particularly when it comes to arena and LAN environments, than Heroic. Heroic are not as proven in such an environment, and both teams, let's be honest, didn't look the strongest coming into this event, nor did they look the strongest going into the playoff stage. So now that they're in, can they shake off the nerves? Can they keep a cool head? I would say there's a really strong argument to be made that Pr0no takes this series. I'm not going for pure analytics here, though. I'm going for what makes the most hype matchup, and that is Heroic taking it over Pr0no to set themselves up as the villain in the next matchup, whoever makes it out between G2 and NiP. Why can Heroic defeat Pr0no? Well, if you watch Thorin's video on the Pickems, then you know that Heroic has a very solid map pool. You know that Heroic themselves can play the veto against their opponent and use that as a little bit of an advantage going into it. But you should also know, and this is irrespective of what other videos you've watched, that Heroic themselves are very momentum-based and in some ways very mentality-based. Can they get momentum on their side? Can they secure the first map win in the veto? And can they go on from there to parlay that into a proper victory over Pr0no in a matchup that they might be considered slight underdogs in on the Danish side? I think it's quite possible that Heroic takes this. This is one of the tougher quarterfinal series to call. It actually makes it quite hype if Heroic somehow manage to make it out against VP and get into those semifinals and set themselves up as the controversial victor in this particular case. A lot of this hinges on whether or not Cadian actually shows up on LAN, if he can replicate some of his admittedly not so consistent performances in the studio at the majors so far in the arena. That will be quite hype, and also he will essentially be that electrifying talisman in the team of Heroic. We will be able to get a Danish derby, at least halfway there. Let's move one series up. I said Danish derby, and that's because there will at least be one other Dane facing him in the next series. NIP do not look very confident, do not look like a safe bet going into their playoff series against G2, who paradoxically, nobody could ever in good conscience bet on them going into this major. They have shocked the world and gone 3-0 in a series of events that I simply didn't see as very likely. Talking about G2, I did say they would be a pretty solid 3-0 pick if you wanted to gamble on the idea that they could just bomb out completely. But I was not expecting them to activate in a studio environment after playing so many games from online. I really didn't expect a LAN buff to hit them so quickly, and I didn't expect some of the teams that they ended up going against to wind up being those teams, those exact teams. I expected maybe Entropic to not be the team that they faced off in a best of 3, for example. So I am going to now, once again, bet against them. But not necessarily because it makes sense logically. Instead, I'm going to bet against them because a Swedish dominant team in Stockholm, in the major, in an arena, with a crowd, is going to be massively hype. And Device going up against Heroic, that's a Danish derby in and of itself. Predicting for hype and predicting for viewership, predicting for making these unforgettable moments in the major. I'm hoping that every series is a close and not ugly 3-map series. I'm hoping that we get 2-1s across the board in a lot of these series, that everybody gets tested. And really, if you get a 2-0 and you're Gambit or you're Na'Vi, that is a little bit more acceptable. But this series against G2, NIP should definitely be taken to a 3rd map. And you know what? Heroic VP, I expect that to go 3 maps as well. And every series thereafter, once we get to semifinals and beyond, I fully expect a realistic probability that it goes to 3 maps. And I also would really like to see that just from the perspective of these teams being taken to the absolute brink and being tested on the world stage in an environment we haven't seen as Counter-Strike fans in over 2 years. So let's get hyped for Ninjas in Pajamas, not because they have a good org. They don't. It's shit. Not because they've done a great job with their PR. Obviously, I wouldn't have said the first part if the second part were true. And certainly not because they are actually favored analytically to win over G2. Let's hope for Counter-Strike's sake. And because who doesn't want to see Device S1mple final? Come on, that's a possibility. We'll get to that. Moving on to our 3rd quarterfinal pick, Gambit Esports against Furia. As much as the Brazilian viewership is a dominating factor in my Counter-Strike longevity-based analysis, I will have to go for Gambit here. And it's mostly because now, especially in an arena, especially in this environment, Gambit actually do have a bit of a pull amongst the community. People know Gambit now. They've had a year, despite the fact that there's been basically no shoulder content humanizing these guys. They've had time to get to know the Gambit players, and you can at least pick 2 or 3 of them out of a lineup now, which is not something you could have said a few months ago. So I think Gambit will still pull a lot of Counter-Strike viewers, and most of that is based on the pure excellence that they play. If they can reach their standard heights, they should make short work of Furia, even if some of them are a little bit lackluster in an arena, which certainly many pundits and analysts have wagered down the years that Gambit probably won't be able to replicate their online success offline. Well, they were able to get this far in a LAN studio environment. Let's see what they can do in an arena. I'm betting they can at least replicate some success and get themselves into a semis. They've basically got the most lopsided matchup here, and that's saying something considering our next particular quarterfinal. Natus Vincere against Vitality. Na'Vi have looked interminable so far, and I think that's not going to change. I'm not going to be one of those hipsters, and I'm not going to be picking Vitality, although shout out Maui Snake, he didn't pick Vitality, but he is a hipster. Now, the main thing I need to focus on for the Na'Vi Vitality lineup here is that this is rife for an upset, but especially considering that it would be an enormous upset if this does happen. And especially considering I'm betting for Counter-Strike's viewership and longevity and hype. I want to see S1mple in that major, as a Counter-Strike fan and as an analyst, a lover of the game, an enjoyer, a Chad Counter-Strike enjoyer versus the virgin Valorant watcher. This major needs to bang, and Na'Vi, they are a key ingredient. And of course, it sets ourselves up for a perfect semifinal in Na'Vi versus Gambit. Some people would call this the grand final, not I. I think it's actually a blessing in disguise Gambit wound up on this side of the bracket, because as much as I did say Gambit are a pull, they're not as much of a pull as the teams in the other side of the bracket, one of which will be making it off in my predictions to face Na'Vi in the final. Because as much as Gambit could theoretically upset Na'Vi here, it would indeed be an upset. The last time Gambit defeated Na'Vi, it was a fairly meaningless game. That's a big talking point for a lot of people who went back and looked at that RMR that just happened before the IEM Fall CIS. You have to remember that Na'Vi were already qualified, Gambit were already qualified. The only thing they had to play for, aside from a very minuscule amount of money in prize pool, was just a few RMR points that were meaningless in the grand scheme of things, and also pride, bragging rights, which, you know, some people have said Na'Vi should have gone for that, but it was clear they couldn't get themselves into that mentality. These guys are champions, and they're expected to be champions once again. So I'm betting for them to take it all, but first they need to get past Gambit and find themselves in the finals. Moving on, NiP against Heroic. You kind of already know what's happening here. I did say that S1mple has to face off against Device. I honestly don't think Heroic should defeat NiP or G2, no matter who makes it to this stage. Heroic can certainly be competitive. They can take a map. I think in general, you're going to see a lot of variety out of this semifinal, and it's going to be hype, even if it's not as hype as the Na'Vi Gambit one. for the people who are just sitting here to enjoy Counter-Strike at the highest level. This series will be hype because it's the Danish villains against the mostly Swedish home crowd, and also that Heroic just are villainous in some nature, despite the fact that they have Heroic as their name. It's almost like being Heroic doesn't include any of the things that they've done behind the scenes or otherwise. So you just have to remember that a lot of people are rooting for Heroic to fail, and I think the semifinals is where those roots will become answered. I think the semifinals is where those wishes come true, so to speak. But again, it will be quite impressive for Heroic to have made it this far when so many people counted them out either through personal distaste or simply just underestimating them given their online-focused track record. So props to Cadian and company for making it this far. Nip, though, they'll be in the final. And this sets up a massive grudge match. S1mple versus Device. Na'Vi, this interminable CIS squad that has had a major elude them and especially their star player for so long. NIP, on the other hand, the hometown heroes, the Swedish roster with the Danish mercenary, who may soon be joined, as we saw earlier there was quite the hubbub regarding Astralis. All of this has combined to make probably the most hype and probably the most competitive major grand final in recent history. And I am indeed taking S1mple and company to finally claim a major and win it all. NIP, maybe they take a map. I would say I hope they take a map. I hope we get a really competitive showing from all of these teams, and I hope CS fans around the world can celebrate and rejoice and remind themselves what it means for Counter-Strike to be in an arena with a crowd roaring and standing at their feet and just praying for the gods of Counter-Strike to deliver some very high-quality matches. So stick around, especially after the major broadcasts, because I'll be hosting a show every single day immediately following the major broadcast conclusion. When PGL's stream goes dark, my stream will be going live, twitch.tv/Pr0nogo. You'll be seeing all sorts of people from the Counter-Strike scene. Some talent, maybe some players. You never know who might show up, but I know one thing. You'll see me. And I'll see you. Thanks for making Counter-Strike great again, now that we're in the arena. I know the PGL Major has had some issues going into it, but this is a celebration of what makes Counter-Strike great. It's a celebration of Counter-Strike itself. And at this point, I think we would be doing ourselves a disservice if we allowed that to cloud what is going to be one of the most hype majors of all time in terms of the playoffs. I don't know what to say about that, man. That would just be a tragedy. So avoid tragedies. Make this a comedy in the Shakespearean sense, but not in the way that it turns into a farce. And just make sure you watch some damn Counter-Strike. Goodbye.